Hello and welcome back to Failure and Analysis. My name's Kevin Jordan, and we're here for another Theorycraft chat. Check out theorycraft.club if you want to see who's involved, and we do this every Wednesday evening. And I also stream it on Twitch at twitch.tv/Kevin Jordan. That's me. Tonight's topic is the meta and how designers can tackle it, how designers react to it, how we design for it, how we don't design for it, what we do, what we could do better maybe. So we'll see where the discussion takes us. But yeah, it's all about the meta and metagaming and the community's attachment to said meta. So lots to discuss, way more than we have time for. We'll probably do the usual of we scratch the surface of a bunch of stuff and then leave you guys hanging. But that's what we do here. That's what we're big teases. So hope you enjoy it. Let's dive right in. Let's dive right in. Good evening.
Yes. There he is.
Is this where the cool people hang out?
Get going. What's up, Kevin?
Is this where the cool people hang out?
That's right.
Yeah, you're in the wrong room, though.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, you see what I did there.
I did.
Okay. We love you, Kevin. This is Theorycraft episode 10, and today's topic is going to be designing for the metagame. But first, as usual, we're going to go through some quick what everybody's playing, if anybody has thoughts, news topics that have come up during this past week. Thanks for being here. Chris, have you been playing anything cool?
I briefly downloaded that new game. Gosh, what is it called? Knockout City. It's kind of like a dodgeball PvP arena sort of game. I've been noticing a lot of friends playing it, and so I went through the tutorial, and it was kind of fun. I mean, the art style kind of feels like Fortnite-ish. That's kind of feels like what they're kind of targeting is that sort of demographic, which is not the most, that's probably a good thing maybe in terms of business sense. But yeah, it seems kind of fun. Like the combat seems pretty good. The controls seem good. The UI seems kind of cool. So I haven't done an actual match yet. I just went through the tutorial. Probably gonna check it out later tonight maybe. How about you guys?
Note to Ninja there, Extreme Beach Dodgeball, Knockout City. Just there's an idea. That one's for free. Get on that.
Yeah, good use of physics. They have to have a good physics engine for that.
All right.
I'm pretty sure there was a mini game that was similar to Dodgeball. Maybe it wasn't Dodgeball. That game's such a masterpiece.
Indeed.
You reminded me, we need to have a show just dedicated to
that game.
Yeah.
How
to DOA.
Tina?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You see, because Tina can spike the ball really hard, and you want Tina to be on your team, but she's very cold and not affectionate, and so it's very hard to win her over. And so I can give you all the tips and tricks.
Okay. Let me get my slides ready. I've got several.
This isn't even sarcasm either. Tina's amazing.
Awesome.
I started playing the Mass Effect remastered trilogy.
Ooh.
I'm not super far in it. I think I'm going to have this problem where I still remember everything that happened, and so it's not just. I guess it might not have been long enough for me, but I was just playing on Discord the other night, and we started playing Valheim, as I still am with my weekly crew, and then we started talking about it, and then we started talking about the soundtrack, and then we started putting it on, and then I was like, holy crap, I just need to go through all these experiences again, and I got her working. It looks great. The gunplay in the first one is not as abysmal as I hoped it would be, or no, I thought it might be, because it's that one's a real old one. But we'll see if I stick with it. I want the experience of Mass Effect again. I don't know if I can get it again, and I also feel like, am I prepared to give another 120 hours of my life to 3 games I've already played several times in the case of Mass Effect 1? So we'll see. But I'm glad it's out there because, sorry.
No, I appreciate everything you just said about Mass Effect, but my mind is still blown by the fact that you're still playing Valheim. And I'm
I know.
curious, like, what your group are you just like y'all are progressing slow, or did you start
Dude,
over again? Like, what's the deal?
yeah, okay. I
Yeah,
knew
this is
that like
judging
at
you
some
here.
point, you I knew this was going to come up at some point because I revisit the first episode we did sometimes to like do mixed checks and just. And Candace mentioned what day she and her group finished everything on, and I feel like we're already way past that day, and we are just, I don't know, we're just bad.
Just
It's
sailing.
just like so our routine is we play once a week, we just chum it up. We put on a GroupieBot playlist loaded with just singles from the 90s because who doesn't love listening to Collective Soul while they're playing Valheim? It's just the perfect pairing.
Oh, where's the
And
immigrant
it's
song?
awful and fun. Yeah, that's the right one. We're just slow, and a lot of nights we log on, and it's like, if you don't have a leader telling you like we're raiding these crypts tonight, and then we're gonna go find bone mass, you just get people drifting off, like just chopping wood by themselves, like without really thinking about what to do.
Yeah.
And so,
It is a really cozy game. Like, you can definitely just,
yes.
putting on the Snuggie and enjoying.
I wasn't shaming you. I was curious how other people play the game. And so there's no like that's the beauty, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no wrong way to
Yeah,
play
yeah.
Valheim. And so if y'all just like to hang out once a week, it's nice that you don't
Yeah.
feel the pressure to go kill bone mass.
I
Yeah,
haven't
it's
been
like
like
the
checking. I haven't been checking the updates, but is there any meaningful updates that they've done? I know they've done some. They seem like quality of life changes. Is there any major content they've added?
No, they're all pretty much quality of life changes from what I experienced. But I don't know. Every week is just full of kind of fun micro stories, like the time that my domesticated pigs got out when a raid on my town happened. Um, my favorite thing to do in the game, and then we'll stop talking about Valheim because I could go on for another episode, is like my job whenever we go into swamps or hard to fight through areas is I like building micro shelters all over the place. I like building tiny cozy spaces in the most hostile environments. Like I will full on bolt roof tiles and a workbench and a fire and actually even walls and beds onto the entrance of a crypt dead ass in the middle of the swamp because I just want a point like somewhere in between our main base and what we're doing to just cozy up, get rest back, and it just feels so good to just drop a fire down in the middle of a rainy swamp in that game and just sit there with some avatars. It's like that game's magic. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to come with me next time I go to the DMV. If you like
we'll build a
lightening the
shelter
load
there. Yeah.
of a oppressive place. Yeah.
Build a portal back home.
Yeah. Show up at 4 a.m. and just start building roofs right outside. It's perfect.
Fresh honey as I sit down.
Yep.
Yeah.
I did also log into my WoW account and converted my character to BC and
Nice.
been going
Oh,
through
shit.
cleaning out my inventory and my quest log and all of that.
Don't delete your loofah.
Yeah, yeah. I still have my bag of marbles. I'll just be holding
Nice.
on to that until the Lich King Classic or whatever.
Nice.
Yeah.
When did we put the restriction on it so it was a level cap?
I don't know.
You better use
I
them
think
quick.
that happened in vanilla, right?
Does
Or-
it? Okay.
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm looking at my sticky glue right now, and it's not level restricted yet.
Dude, this sticky glue is like, it's like the mega elixir of World of Warcraft that you save for the final boss fight. And then you're
Yeah.
just like, shit, I haven't used any of these yet. And it's like one day there will be a sticky glue moment and I'll
That's
know
right.
it when I feel it. And then it just never comes.
I've got 9 charges on mine. I used one on Watcher Jordan when I tried to take him when he was 9 levels higher than me. So I splattered some sticky glue on Watcher Jordan.
You're going into BC, obviously. I've been watching the stream.
Trying to catch
You're
up.
prepping.
I also fell off the wagon, and you guys are going to be ashamed of me, but I fell off the wagon and went back to Tarkov a little bit. So talking about putting another 120 hours into a game I've already played.
Did they do an update, or is it just?
No, I
cleaned up?
just got the itch. Yeah.
I feel like we've been waiting for the streets of Tarkov for a while.
Yeah, there's actually another map that's supposed to come out before that. There's a customs expansion, and then, or not a customs, but a factory expansion, and then they're going to do Lighthouse before Streets is ready. So I think internally they're sort of realizing how big Streets of Tarkov is and how extremely unmanageable it is. So they're like, they need more time.
Yeah, did you know that Ubisoft, there's like some leaked game, new version of, or new sequel, I don't know if it's a sequel really, to The Division. It's called Heartland, I think.
Okay.
And it's a free-to-play PvE versus P.
Right.
I don't know, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Kind of open world game. It basically just sounds like Tarkov. So
they're trying to do Tarkov.
Like, hey,
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tarkov kind of was, I think, inspired by the Dark Sun, which is from The Division.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they'd be like, "Hey, this is our thing. Let's,
right.
you know."
I'm interested.
Yeah. So we'll see. It got leaked, like a video got leaked, and I tried watching the video. I haven't seen the video yet, but it got deleted everywhere on the internet. You know, the Nazgul Ubisoft lawyers were sicked on the internet.
I'd suggest looking somewhere in Russia. You'll probably find it.
Maybe, yeah, totally. But yeah, I think that's going to be a genre that we're going to see more games like that. That would be actually a good episode to talk about, is that sort of design of Tarkov and deconstructing it, because I think it's a genre that's going to become more popular. And there's just a Dreamhaven startup, a new studio called Raid. Got a Raid Base, I think it's called. And
Raid Base.
They're doing a game that is in the same genre, it feels like.
Okay.
And so
interesting.
And I don't know if you listen to this other podcast. It's called Deconstructor of Fun, but they're loosely talking about this Ubisoft game, and the hosts on there were just dogging the genre. They don't think it has a future, and they think it has so many design problems. And yada yada yada. And so,
are there any gamers in that group?
They're all biz dev people, so they're all people
right.
figure out revenue and monetization and stuff. But
somebody show him Nikita's bank statement. That should get their attention.
That kind of brings us into news, talking about Raid Base and Dreamhaven and such.
And here Candace is playing.
News story? Oh, yes, please. Sorry.
I was dodging that question. I have not played a video game in 1.5 weeks. My friends my friends are vaccinated now, and so every night has been going out and doing stuff with the real life graphics of outside. So
that's amazing.
That's good.
I've been trying to plan a move to Santa Monica, so I've been looking at apartments with all my spare time and stuff. So.
All right.
Oh yeah, I'd be interested.
I guess you win this week, Candace, being an adult. Jesus.
Yeah. And so in terms of news, there was I don't know if you saw today, Kevin, they came up with the UE5 kind of evaluation version or preview version, and it looks pretty exciting, and everyone's excited about this. And I don't even, did you ever download Unreal, Kevin, and try it out? I'm curious how you feel about the engine versus WoW, etc.
No, I haven't. I've never dived into it.
How about you guys, Luca or Candace? Did you see the video or anything about UE5, and what do you think?
No. Well, I saw this concept of meta sounds, which is a new type of sound object that they're adding into blueprints, it looks like. My FOMO with never working within the modern Unreal engines is just getting larger and larger by the day, because so the way it works with most game engines, these days I feel like it's really common to bring middleware into your projects. Wise and Fmod are the two sort of major ones. And so that's like all of your kind of audio engine functionality in a very turnkey format. But Unreal has so much awesome baseline audio functionality that I think you can make a strong case for not even needing one of those big ones. It's like it looks kind of like nodes and connecting wires, and it surfaces a lot of interesting information that's just in the code parameters and things, like directly to the audio designer in this way that lets you connect things and adjust sounds according to what's going on in the game. And they just keep increasing it. This Meta Sounds edition looks like it's just new sort of sound objects you'll be able to play with that let you do that let you work kind of even more interactively, because they're just a bunch of controls for adjusting wavetables. This is all getting kind of techie, but the audio engine team at Unreal are just a bunch of fucking geniuses.
Nice.
The guy who's the head developer of it is like probably the reason I became a sound designer, because I saw some talk he gave on Spore at GDC in 2008 while I was still a producer. And I just could not believe the generative music system that they built for that game. I was like, I can't believe people are doing this. And so Aaron McLaren's amazing, and they're all shipping cool stuff. And yeah, I'm just feeling kind of left out. Like working over here in Unity and Fmod, and it gets the job done. But new toys are exciting. So that's where my head's at with that announcement.
Yeah, I mean, I love the interesting things with the engine. Is just that, or with UE5 especially, is that I don't know all the details and all the names of everything, but traditionally it becomes a lot. It's a big thing on development teams of trying to keep the performance is always like a huge thing, and especially when you have certain assets that like you've got to keep like the polygon count down because for performance and loading, and it could cause people to lag. Every people who play WoW probably have the experience or playing, or if you play Breath of the Wild and you're in the God, what is the forest called? Shit. There's some parts in, like, say, Breath of the Wild where it gets really laggy because they have so many assets and fog and yada yada, and you just like lag out, right? And so this is always something that developers always trying to think about when they make the game. But in UE5, they have this sort of kind of system where you could have really high polygon count assets that kind of dynamically adjust depending on for natively, and so you don't have to worry about polygon counts and making different LOD versions, which are just different like polygon count versions for different kind of computers or consoles or whatever. Like usually, like if you have a game on PlayStation and you're going to have it on the Switch, let's say, you're going to have a lot of assets that are lower polygon count because you're just not going to have the same performance benchmarks on, say, PS5 versus Switch, etc., right? And so I think that is a big thing. It's really interesting because a big part of being a really great 3D artist or artist in general or any developer is being able to do really great art or assets that is efficient and performant. And so going forward, that may not be a variable, and people don't think about performance anymore. That would be crazy, right?
Wow.
The dream, anyways. Yeah, it's a lot of reclaimed time too. I mean, no one has fun making multiple scaled down versions of the same thing so if that can be effectively removed from consideration and dev time, I mean, that's a huge win. So we're a little bit behind because it's been a bunch of chit chat today. Are there any like real highlights from the Epic case that you want to bring up, Chris? Any like hot takes you've been scrolling through, or Candace, if you've seen anything, or should we just keep going?
I don't about the lawsuit, or are we still talking about the new engine? Because I work in Unreal sometimes, so.
Oh, well, let's just full reverse for the second time today. I've tried to go too fast, and why don't you close out the Unreal discussion then? Sorry.
Oh, no, there were just a couple of things that I was excited about with the Unreal Engine. So, the open world grid support is actually huge because the way that like the workflow for multiple people working, let's say you're making like a level, right? And it's a forest, right? If you wanted multiple people to be able to work on that forest, you'd have to separate the assets into different like sub-levels that are part of a parent level. So you would have one sub-level that is the terrain, and then only one person can edit that terrain at once because the terrain is all contiguous unless you were to build the terrain like a jigsaw puzzle and like a grid. But then you could have a different layer that has the trees, and you could have a different layer that has the water. So in theory, people can work at the same time. But if you wanted two people to work on the terrain at the same time, that just wasn't possible unless you made your map like a jigsaw puzzle. And so the grid support that allows multiple people to work on the same terrain object is actually pretty big for larger teams developing larger games in Unreal Engine. So that's like turbo exciting. And then of course anything that they can do to help with the animation system. The new animation control rig is going to be big because you usually have to use like third-party software and port it all over and like Houdini and stuff like that to get it to do what you want it to do. So
Mm-hmm.
um, those are going to be pretty like good quality of life changes in the Unreal 5 engine for sure. Not to mention the lighting changes that you don't have to build or bake the lighting to have dynamic lights,
Lumen.
which is usually a huge performance cost, right? So it'll be interesting to see what the specs on that are actually like. I didn't delve too deeply into what the lumens actually does, so
Yeah,
or
do you
nanite,
know,
I mean.
Candace? Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's it. Nanite, right? Yeah, yeah. Do you know, Candace, if like in the engine, because one challenge with Unreal has always been open worlds. I don't have a lot of really good example of open world games in Unreal, and the big reason is because the engine traditionally wasn't really great at asset streaming. And so, if you go into a big world, you load the entire world, and you have to get that gets really expensive. And so there's like some third party solutions with Unreal that address this, but I wasn't sure. I noticed they had some. I didn't pay attention to the entire video, but I was wondering if they addressed that in any way.
Yeah, that's the new one file per actor system.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I gotta check back into that. Oh, I mean, we could do a whole show on Unreal probably, or engines and all this tech. It's a little boring maybe to the average person, but it is. I find it really interesting. Okay, and what else we got, Luca, in terms of news?
I mean, there was the Netflix signaling their interest in developing games going forward.
Hmm.
It seems like it's going to be mostly speculation. Unless I don't know. Do you want to talk
Yeah.
about like any business side insights that kind
Well,
of stuck out to you?
I always thought it was interesting because, God, who's the CEO of Netflix? I forget his name right now. I've read his book,
Reed?
but
Is it
yeah,
not still
Reed
Reed
Hastings.
Hastings?
Reed
Yeah.
Hastings. Reed
Yeah.
Hastings. Yep. It was interesting because he mentioned, HBO Max and all these others aren't real competitors because really who they're competing with is Fortnite. Because essentially all these companies are competing for engagement, for people's time, for minutes, right? And so the biggest competitor Netflix has is gaming, not
Mm-hmm.
really the other streaming services, right? Gaming now is bigger than streaming services and music, Spotify combined. And so that's their biggest competitor. So it makes sense for them to want to invest in games going forward. But, as Amazon's found out, like it's not it's gaming is really hard. And there's not that many really great game developers out there. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do for sure.
Well, I'm going to take the silence as a signal to move into designing the metagame, the main topic here. And kind of as usual, Kevin, I'll throw this into your ring, just to get us going.
I might pass it this time because this topic is so big,
Right.
and I really don't know where to start. So
I
yeah,
I have an idea.
go
Can
for it.
you
Yeah.
describe to the audience what we mean when we say the metagame? Can you describe some examples of a metagame or what is not a metagame?
Yeah, I would say like this is one of the problems is it's two sides. There's two sides to it. There's the design metagame thing, which we'll be talking about, but there's also like the meta that the players participate in. So it's sort of their angle on what it is, and for them, it's basically like the most efficient way to achieve goals. Essentially, it's like min maxing, where there are challenges in front of any player, and the meta becomes the most effective or efficient way to solve those challenges. It starts out as just getting the job done, which is very binary, victory or defeat, and then it sort of transforms into how to do it the fastest, right? The speed run meta, or efficiency meta, depending on the game.
Mm-hmm.
And for some games, it doesn't get to that second element, like Magic the Gathering. There's a very pronounced meta, and that's all about getting the W, right? It's all about just winning. Hearthstone, probably same. I haven't played much Hearthstone, but I imagine it's pretty much the same. So efficiency doesn't matter. Actually, efficiency in like the chase for legend of Hearthstone is a thing. But yeah, like the old school, like Magic the Gathering tournaments, it's just all about what are the best decks and how do they interact with each other. And so net decking becomes like a big thing. And so the participation of the broad swaths of the community that are trying to be successful feel compelled to pay attention to the meta and embrace the meta in order to, gain prestige essentially within the communities that are involved in this. If all you're doing is playing kitchen table Magic with your family, then the meta doesn't matter. But as soon as you kind of dive into the bigger world, it's much harder to ignore these sort of best practices for being successful if you want to be prestigious or just successful. So, and then how do designers and developers react or design into, or in some cases try to prevent some of that from being too prominent?
Can you explain to me if here's another question. Are there any good examples of a player created meta in a PvE game instead of a competitive PvP game?
Yeah, WoW has a big PvE meta. Like
the example I always think of is when Timeless Isle released in Mists of Pandaria, and there was all the stuff you can do to get timeless coins, right? You can
mm-hmm.
find rares, and there's all these people that roam around in giant hordes to take down the rares, and that's really fun. And there
Mm-hmm.
are these chests that respawn every couple of days that are always in different places, so you always have something to explore. And the whole idea is that you're getting these timeless coins, and you eventually, when you have enough timeless coins, you spend them on whatever. So no
Yeah.
matter what you're doing on Timeless Isle, you're doing well.
Right.
But then they found that there are these frogs that had a really high drop rate that respawned
Mm-hmm.
more reliably than the chests respawn, or the rares were too unreliable on where they would spawn. And so, even though it was faster to do all of those things at once, the meta became just go to the Timeless Isle
Right.
and kill a bunch of frogs, because then you don't have to worry about running around or exploring. So, like, the meta game changed
Mm-hmm.
from exploration and being rewarded by doing fun new things every day to, like, actually, what if we just chilled and we did what we're normally doing, like in
Right.
dungeons? And, like, I don't think, and like, controversially, I don't think either of those is wrong.
Right.
I
Right.
think that if you just want to chill and kill some frogs, like, we made didn't do it on purpose, but WoW
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
that content for you. And so that's what I mean by, like, there was the designer created metagame, but
Mm-hmm.
then there was like the player created metagame, and like, but sometimes it can be harmful.
Yes.
Um, and certainly in PvP, the stakes are higher, and there are bad metas because they either like break compositions, or
Mm-hmm.
they skew monetization, or you feel like you have to get this new card, or you have to get this new hero or this new
Mm-hmm.
champion in order to stay on top of the meta game, which is, you know, in like a 5v5 brawler, it's, I don't know that I don't want to do like an analysis, but yeah, there's a lot of harmful behavior that can come out of gaming the metagame, or changing the metagame. And so it's always interesting to see how developers respond. And
Yeah.
so I guess the next question I would like to ask the floor is, can you think of a time when there was a, either in your opinion, harmful or not harmful metagame that was emergent from the players, and then a company intervened? And can you remember what that example was and how they intervened?
One example that just went into my head was, I don't know if anyone played that game Dota Underlords,
I
but
did.
I was
Yeah.
playing that game. I was playing that game like every night. Like, what was this last summer, the year summer before? It was a while
No, it
ago.
was 2019, I think.
Jeez, it was that far away. But yeah, I mean, that
Yep.
game was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, when they were like developing it, and you would use, like, Kunkka was overpowered in that game. I don't know if you remember that, Kevin, but he would just boat you, and the boat was just so much fun and hilarious. and it was overpowered, and a lot of people used Kunkka. But then they changed it and they nerfed it. And I understand as a designer, I understood why they nerfed. I mean, as a player and designer, I both understood why
Mm-hmm.
they nerfed it. It made total sense. But the game became noticeably less fun,
Right.
and I kind of drifted away from the game and churned out.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the stats, people churned out from the game because, around that time, for many other reasons too, they added like the actual underlords that they always planned, which are heroes, and I felt the game became too complicated after that, and I didn't really like the underlords, and
Right.
so they sort of addressed the metagame head on to try to balance it for good reasons, but I think it kind of made the game worse in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And that's always the risk, right? Of always be like, oh, this meta, it didn't turn out how I designed it, so I'm going to
Right.
fix this, and then you kill your game.
Right. Yeah, so I do think reaction time or reaction intent is actually a big part of this discussion. Um, but yeah, I feel like talking about the Magic the Gathering meta is a good starting point, but um, again, there's just so much to talk about. But the way I've always perceived the Magic one is like between set releases, right? It takes a while for the meta to pop up. And so the meta pops up initially, and then it evolves as people sort of respond to the meta and keep experimenting and coming up with better decks and things like that. But eventually it settles and it gets into this like what we call solving the format, right? The format becomes solved and the meta sort of stabilizes. And it usually stabilizes reasonably well. Like it's not one deck, but it's like a handful or something like that. But and then that persists until the next set is released, and then the process restarts. And the developers tend to feel like the set releases sort of have to come at a good rate in order to prevent the meta from being or the format from being solved for too long, but that it's okay that the format gets solved. And I think that mentality is missing in a lot of live service games. I feel like a lot of developers react too quickly to the pressure from the players that this is overpowered, this is underpowered, and they don't give the meta enough breathing space to actually get to that solved format place. And so that leads to this constantly evolving meta, which is very like spontaneous and urgent and isn't really explored and experimented to its full extent. And I think that's not the right approach. I feel like urging patience for a lot of developers is like a better approach, and let players noodle this stuff out for longer. And one example I'll give, and you probably remember this, Chris, is the arenas where hunters were just considered terrible. And then that one hunter showed everyone how to do it. And I can't remember his name, but he's pretty legendary. And then that suddenly it became, Beast Cleave was everywhere. Because this one hunter just transformed the meta because he was given long enough in the format to noodle through it all the way. And it was such a great example of like everyone thinks they've solved the meta at every stage of its evolution, but it's not really real and until it's been around for a long time. So I feel like patience is really important here.
You mentioned something that kind of blew my mind actually as you're talking about letting the meta settle and letting the players figure it out. It reminded me that like you kept using the word we and the players in a collective,
Mm-hmm.
and there is something strong about that sense of unity that people get when they're trying to figure out a new meta, either
Mm-hmm.
when a new deck releases or a new expansion releases, and everyone's trying to find out what the optimal setup for healers and DPS.
Yep.
And even if a lot of people aren't theory crafting in and of themselves, they get to feel like they're participating in that
Yep.
exploration of a meta. And so that's kind of like a valuable community experience in and of
Right.
itself. And so if you're shifting it constantly and you're making it too unpredictable, for the sake of balancing a meta, I can see how that sense of community will feel kind of diminished.
That's right.
Your results are now
Yeah.
invalid,
100%.
and
You don't give them
and
time, and it defeats the joy of the process, right? So the
yeah, it kind
process
of
is really important for a lot of people.
it's almost like an exploration, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
even if you're just a participant in the backseat reading forums or waiting for your friends to tell you, oh yeah, we found out shamans are the good one or
Right.
whatever. There's something to that sense of community that
It's
can't be understated,
it's
and
also
that's
a whole different
fascinating.
player type, like because I bet there's a fair number of theory crafters that just can't perform in the environments that they theory craft for, right? They literally can't push the buttons fast enough, right?
Yeah.
But it's a whole different skill set where legends are being born in these environments, but they're not at the top of the PvP charts, or that they're not the guys that are in the world first raid guilds, but they're the guys behind the scenes that are doing amazing work and having a blast and finding their place and serving the community in really important ways. And so yeah, like going too fast, you eliminate that group, and that's a group that might be starving for this kind of content.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the roles within the meta where they're like the doers, the performers,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are like the hardcore and they're good at mashing the buttons and they're good at thinking on their feet. But then there's the people who are good at math and
Right.
planning and yeah, maybe and those two people often aren't one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there's any more roles in the meta that you could identify.
Yeah. The influencers, I guess, is another role. The people that
Yeah.
try to convince everyone this is the new meta, and it's just based on something they've heard, and everyone goes that way, only to find out that a week later, no one did the math, and they realize that it's not actually the meta. Evangelists, yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah, and there's always this like segment of players who always play as the underdog, and they want to
Mm-hmm.
prove that the worst thing in
Yes.
people's minds can actually work. And so they're constantly prodding at like
Mm-hmm.
things that no one thinks about, like, oh, I'm gonna make the Moonkin work in Arena or whatever it is,
Yep.
and those are always, and like Candace said, it's interesting because there's always roles to play in the meta, right?
Right. That was me.
One
I always played Zangief in Street Fighter because everyone looked at him and was like, "This character's terrible," and I'm like, "Okay, let's find out why he's in the game."
Yeah, I always like playing the underdog characters
Mm-hmm.
too. So I think this is kind of my role. Like in HOTS, I would always play Sergeant Hammer, and everybody would always kick me out of the group when I would select that character in the lobby.
Yeah.
But I just like that character, and I like thinking. And when we did win, it always feels really good when you
Oh,
play
right.
the unmeta the character
Yeah.
and you win.
Yeah.
Because
Winning
everyone
with
gets
Dan
pissed, and you
is
yeah,
just extra
yeah,
painful.
yeah. Do you remember? I don't know if you're on a team at this time, Kevin, but there's this one time where everybody so what happened was one of the classes, one of the specs was really underpowered,
Mm-hmm.
and we hotfixed it and said, okay, we fixed this. We made I forgot what it was, maybe Marks Hunters 15% better and better, and suddenly everyone started playing them in Arena, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the Marks Hunters became the meta. But then we discovered the hotfix never went live. We never even increased their damage. And
Oh my God,
but
that's
the meta
amazing.
shifted just by us posting this note that
Yep.
it wasn't even live,
Yeah.
right? And it just shows you perception is really reality.
Yep.
And and so
Debated.
yeah.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. You've mentioned two really important things regarding this discussion: is perception and the social impact, of not pursuing the meta, or how powerful the meta influences social interactions in some games, and those are really difficult and to design for, but super important. So that's why there's a lot of players that they won't allow you to like sit on the meta in terms of like the community to the developer relationship. They just won't be like, okay, we'll be patient, or we'll keep experimenting, because in the meantime they're being shunned, socially, because they've got an off spec or what's considered to be underpowered. So they're literally like not being able to participate in the social experience of the game, which can be really harmful. But yeah, I tend to, again, I tend to preach patience and, gosh, what was the other big thing I wanted to say about developing it? And I think, Candace already alluded to this or said it outright, but it's okay. I think a lot of game developers fall into the trap of not thinking that it's okay that your game is imbalanced. I think it's actually okay, and there's actually a lot of good elements to the fact that your game is imbalanced. And so you have to kind of start with that point, and then once you realize your game is always going to be unbalanced, and that means there's always going to be a meta, but that's not, again, the meta isn't the enemy. There are ramifications of the meta that you can judge as the enemy, like the social stigma and perception, ruling the day in weird ways, or meta leading to play patterns that are really not fun, like you talked about with Underlords. But that should be the thing that designers are attacking, not the fact that there's one spec to rule them all, or like the fact that there's a meta and some classes are more powerful than others, or some champions are more efficient than others, things like that. So they should think bigger pictures, typically, is basically what I'm trying to get to.
Really funny too, because you mentioned this kind of underdog role in the meta, where I feel like they're very important to that ecosystem as well, because one, an underdog mentality is going to reject the meta. They're going to challenge it. And that's going to feed the theory crafters. So if this is like if this is a huge like flow chart or something, you need the people who are feeding the other people in the roles, right? Like tank feeds healer, and then healer feeds tank, but then everyone needs DPS or like whatever. So if you have the people who are like the theory crafters aren't nearly as powerful unless they have the underdog people who are going to challenge the meta.
Right.
And each of them gets satisfaction from sort of the same thing, but there is something tremendously satisfying about, okay, if PMR is the meta, I'm going to show you that hunters can be completely dominating. I'm going to show you that a beast cleave build is going to break your meta. And then they have to go back and they have to readjust their meta. And so there's this whole like social ecosystem going on and then there's the influencers and the commentators who are also trying to stay on top of what they believe is the current meta, and they're having their own little wars that are also, because influence and perception is so important, those are also changing the meta. So it's always like moving the goalposts a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you just have like the fans. And I call them the fans because these are the people who are just, they're participants in the meta, but they're just eating their popcorn waiting for the fight to be over,
Right.
And without those people, the theory crafters don't get any satisfaction. The
Right.
underdogs don't get any satisfaction. And so it's wild to sort of analysis or to do an analysis rather of the roles within the meta and just sort of the social cohesion that they have in any given game.
And it's so important, right? So people that try to, I see negative work being done when a designer's trying to perfectly balance everything, because their goal is actually to eliminate all of that goodness, without realizing it. So, and players will frequently ask for this. They want fairness. And they believe that perfect balance is fairness, but it's actually a different thing. And there's also just the element of context or content, because content changes from minute to minute. So the context is changing, and the meta is going to change based on the content that's relevant. So, especially in like a tiered setting, if you release, 2 tiers at the same time, then everyone's going to struggle on the first tier, and the meta is going to establish. But the second things start to get overcome, the meta starts changing as it enters into the second tier, and then there's that whole process again. So, if you're doing a lot of work on trying to fix the meta for the first tier, a lot of that you're going to find is wasted, because it's going to move so fast by the time, if you're doing careful work and not doing knee-jerk reactions, then a lot of that work is going to feel really awkward as the meta transforms completely once the tier 2 is kind of being attacked. So that's the other thing a lot of people don't realize, is how fast the context of the game changes and what matters to people changes.
Totally. As a content designer, I was always trying to keep my finger on the meta of the like what is the optimal raid environment, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this healer is really good at this thing. So I need to make sure there are enough challenges as in an aggregate, not in a given encounter,
Right.
but in the raid zone that like the shaman can feel good
Mm-hmm.
versus a druid, whereas like a druid is really strong because everyone can be spread out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like DPS profiles are really big too. Like imagine how much the meta of World of Warcraft would change if every boss was a single target burn fight,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And
Exactly.
so you have to be really mindful and responsive to the meta. And so you might have these grand plans and these grand designs of, okay, everybody is getting their piece in this raid zone, right? There's the three target cleave, there's the
Mm-hmm.
multi-daughters, there's the the turn and burn, you got all these people that you're trying to feed with your content, and then the meta changes, and then suddenly it's a slippery slope, right? Because now the meta
Mm-hmm.
has changed
Yep.
and this one thing is more powerful, and then the content has to be either fixed or left alone
Yeah.
to allow for that meta to exist.
And that's the other thing. There's a
Yeah.
lot of players that
Sorry.
just real quick. There's a lot of
Yep.
players that give up at the first sign of adversity, right? So if you're viewing it through that lens, like, okay, we've got this challenge, and there's one class that's really good at this challenge, like you were saying, it's a fight for druids, healing, and now the meta is just bring all druids, right? But you don't give the shamans an opportunity to figure it out, right? And so there's a whole section of the population that will just quit instantly as soon as like a bunch of shamans that are just like, oh, sucks to be us, oh well, but you can't respond to that group. You sort of have to challenge them to figure it out on their own, so that, because the next fight is for them, so if they can get through this moment of adversity, and somebody's going to, right, like somebody's going to figure out how to get a guild that is running a boss with way too many shamans, how to get through this fight, and then they're all going to be more practiced at dealing with the adversity, right? So you can't respond quickly to that player base that's going to want you to fix it for them because they don't want to roll up their sleeves, because that creates a really bad relationship between devs and players, where the expectation is that you do the work for me rather than I do the work myself.
I just wanted to jump in because we've got 15 minutes left. If anybody wants to raise their hand, come up on stage and share development anecdotes or ask questions about different parts of WoW's metagame or just relate a story, go ahead and do it and we'll page you on up.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to say too, real quick, Kevin, is you mentioned Magic the Gathering, which I don't really, I confess to say never really played Magic the Gathering that much. I bought Pokemon cards instead. But there's a really great, probably my favorite GDC talk of all time is by Mark Rosewater, and it's about the 20 lessons in game design. And there's one that I think is kind of what we're talking about, which is just that you have to allow the players for a sense of ownership. And I always kind of think the metagame is kind of something that the players own in some ways. Sometimes the designer can be like, this isn't the game that I envisioned, and so I'm going to shift the metagame to what I wanted. And then it comes out for the worse, right?
Right. Yeah, the goal should be create an environment where players can have fun and then let it happen. Don't over control it. They're not playing it the way I wanted them to. I have to fix them.
Yeah. Is there a case, I feel like everybody is coming down on the side of letting things settle and obviously letting metas develop and leaving them alone. Like I feel that's kind of the stance in the room. Is there a case to be made for more rapid changes? And like, have you seen any games that have sort of done it well? Like what does the meta look like, or can any kind of meta exist in any healthy way with like more frequent updates, or is there a flip side to this?
There is. I get really irritated when a meta forms around either a bug or a play pattern that's really awful in my mind. Examples of this would be like the Greater Blessing thing for classic vanilla raiding. Paladins would just spam Greater Blessing because it had a weird threat modifier, and that's how they would keep aggro as Paladin tanks. But when I see that, I'm like, that's not really what I want Paladins doing. Like, that's not how I want them feeling heroic by spamming a buff over and over. And so that's the kind of thing that starts to really irritate me. And it's like, I don't like, and the players will get really nervous at this point because I'll say, I don't like that. And they'll think like, oh my God, if you fix it, that means we're back to not being invited to the raid, right? So it's like, I like the outcome that they're being invited to, main tank the raid, but I don't like the play pattern. So that's kind of when I want to, roll up my sleeves and get my hands in there and try to do a decent job of fixing it without, breaking that they're getting invited thing. But, any changes you make, there's usually going to be unforeseen consequences and, just a risk of failure. So, but that's kind of when I'm motivated to respond and, get in there and make changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fair. That good.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's not that the answer is to always just let it be and to let your game be imbalanced. Another thing to realize is when you make a balance change, something as small as 5% off of Beast Cleave or something can completely break the meta, right? Because it was just powerful because there's or like there was a racial that was really good because a raid zone was disproportionately beast or something like that, and you're making this very surgical change, and that surgical change is just made for the participants in the meta because whoever is not either engaging in one of those roles as either like a fan or an influencer or a theory crafter or an underdog, they don't see or feel 5% difference on Beast Cleave, right? And so it's harmless for those people, but to the people that you're making the change for, it means the whole world. Like 5% can mean the whole world. And so it's just important to understand the social climate of what your changes will do, right? So an example of a harmless meta, well, not harmless, but um, example, people will self-police a meta, right? You're not policing the meta. You kind of are by determining what the rules of the game are, but an example that I always use is like back in the day when there weren't caps on combat reses in World of Warcraft. You would see people who would win heroic fights, but they brought 9 or 10 druids to a 25-man fight, and you said, well, congratulations, but you guys are obviously fuck-ups because you had to bring that many combat reses. And so people get their own, that's like the underdog meta, right? Like, congratulations, you did it. Like, you want a fucking cookie? But then that can be really harmful if the social climate in that space is also like, well, if you're not a druid, then you're not invited to play with us. Or if you choose to play a class that's similar to druid who isn't a druid and you're getting abused, or there's harmful behavior it within the meta. And again, these are just the people that are opting into the meta. So I think that those kind of changes, the ones that corral the harmful behavior, I think those are the ones that are necessary. But again, like it's just like chicken and egg issue where like you have to respond to the vocal few players, but if you, I don't know, but when you do, you create like more problems.
Right. And you don't have to make changes. As we've learned tonight, you can just lie about a change and everyone will shift based on you saying that you did something and you didn't actually do anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many times where you'd buff a class by 1%. Everyone would start playing it and trying it out and min-maxing for it. And now it's like the most OP class, right? Like 1%. It's like, and there's a lot of times too, like internally, we look at the data and have UX and QA play test things and like, I think it's actually good. The players just aren't playing it, and it's just really kind of frustrating because again, perception's a reality. So if the players think it's terrible or garbage, they're not going to ever try it, and it's never going to be, part of the actual sort of meta, right?
Yeah, and then we have like the Indalamar case, right, where he showed everyone Fury Warrior was busted. We actually nerfed it after he showed everyone how it's done. But yeah, we sat on it because internally, I remember we knew the power of the Fury Warrior. We were just waiting for the community to sort of figure it out. and he stepped in, filled that role, and then everyone started playing it, and then we realized, wow, it's actually too strong. We have to actually take it back a peg now. But yeah, perception, so powerful. And there just aren't enough experimenters. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I thought there was a gap in speech there. I was going to welcome our guest, Dazalis. What brings you up?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, team, for having me on and for doing these conversations. I think they're really cool. My question was, what do you think about obfuscation or hiding information from the player in terms of how it would affect, meta play habits? My example is, I think in Tarkov, they do a really good job at making it very hard to simulate how much damage a bullet will do for a particular gun, because it's just based on too many different modifiers and situational variables.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I was just kind of curious, not that I think simming's bad, but what do you think of making things difficult to sim, and how would that impact meta?
I think obfuscation is generally bad. It prevents people from getting in and enjoying the environment. I just made the comment there aren't enough experimenters. So if you're actively trying to obfuscate to keep people from, solving the format, as it were, I think that's a losing battle. I think there's people that are going to get access to the data, but it's going to be fewer, and it's going to be even more guided. The meta is going to be even more guided by perception and misinformation. So I'd rather people be able to engage in the process and have a good time at it from multiple levels, and then because that's a whole gameplay system in itself, and then evaluate from a more common understood perspective between devs and players what they're doing. And the Tarkov example, I don't know that they're intentionally obfuscating. I think that's just a side effect of a very complex physics engine that they're trying to simulate. But it is difficult to know the final answer. But other games are, like, I know a lot of games try to hide information. They just flat out won't tell you. But people eventually suss out the information. So it's a losing battle.
Yeah, it's really hard. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Candace.
I was just going to say there can be a benefit to not obfuscating or hiding information. It just depends on what choices are brought in front of the player in a meta. Like, is it which class am I playing, or which gun am I playing, or like it just depends, like, where you're hiding the information in that choice matrix, I think. So an example being, if you were to hide the exact DPS of a sniper rifle at optimum usage versus a shotgun at optimum usage, and just let the player decide what their preferred method of playing that is, right? Because those are two very different play styles. There's the very deliberate, pointed, timed, holding your breath, waiting for that right shot, leading moment of using a sniper rifle, versus the fuck you, I'm going to run up to you, I'm going to punch you in the face with my melee, and I'm going to hit you with my shotgun, and that's going to feel amazing. And imagine if you were told, if you're the person who likes to do that, but you were told the sniper rifle is the right way to play the game, then that makes your experience worse as somebody who wants to play the shotgun game. And so if you were to, for example, highlight how much better a sniper rifle is, like, you do 5,000 times the damage as the person who maybe they just had fun playing the game, like they weren't participants in the meta, they just like to play with the shotgun. So anyways, that was like very long belabored point that sometimes it's not about obfuscation, it's just more of about, like, letting the player decide which talent is right for them or which gun is right for them, and maybe not overloading them with too much information. But the people who do want to participate in the meta, they can figure that shit out.
I love that comment, because I've seen that a fair bit. Quality colors, like, we've been using those forever now, like green and blue and purple, like, and that's telling people, it's sending a really strong message to players that this is better than that, and it's forming their decision before they even look at the actual values of things. And so you do have to be careful with how much you're highlighting or trying to control the decision-making process of the person looking at your stuff. So that's a great point, that, like, sometimes less information is better.
I just think it's just so hard to obfuscate these days. You know, I think simming is there's just like, you know, a bunch of people who have like PhDs and, you know, mathematicians and stuff like in these communities now, and they write programs and code, and it's just really hard to kind of compete with that as a developer. And you know, we touched on this before. I feel like, you know, the best way to deal with um, uh, making the meta stale or whatever is just create a bunch of, you know, conditional choices rather than trying to engineer them out, or rather than just kind of saying, or just kind of like leaving it open ended.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because for the way that Dota dealt with this, and I think actually League Two now is basically Ice Frog at Valve just said, you know, screw it, and just basically he just makes a patch and just totally like flips the board on balance to shift the meta. He doesn't just let people just kind of figure things out, because I think the community just takes too long to do it, and they feel like the meta, you know, there's this line that the players always use: the meta is stale, which just means like, you know, we've been playing in this sort of rule set for a while. Can we have something new?
Right.
You know.
It also ends up meaning that it gets boring to watch, which is another side effect of something going on for too long. Solved or not, you know, if you have to host like 2 major back-to-back esports competitions and people are running the same comps, it's just a bad look, I think. People sort of expect different these days.
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't want the stale meta is a real thing. You don't want the format to be solved for too long before you mix up the context. But I think the problem for a lot of games is they don't let it get to that stage in reality. Like, I think, you know, it's the same thing on Twitch where it's like, you know, a game disappears for one day and it's like dead game. People say stale meta, you know, a second after the latest news came out, right? Even though there's another news bulletin tomorrow about fresh new stuff, you know. So, you know, people will claim it's a stale meta, but it takes a while for metas to actually work themselves out, especially when the context is shifting so much.
I mean, I do think Tarkov sort of does a good job at kind of making the meta not very apparent, and making kind of it hard to figure out to min-max it. And the way they do that, and the way a bunch of games do this, is basically there's so many variables in a combat situation that even if you are min-max to the hilt, right, that's not literally going to be the only variable there. It's like, did he see you and you didn't? Did you go? Were you looting a corpse? Where, you know, did someone in your squad die and it's just you? Or there's all these variables there, so that it's not just like what gun you're carrying, what, you know, what weapon what gear you're using, etc. Right?
Even internally, it's what skill sets do I have to maximize the meta equipment that everyone's saying is the best, right? I may not have the same skill sets. I can't shoot like Shroud, so I might need a different gun. I need one that has a huge mag so I can correct my aim, because I'm not going to get him with the first shot.
Anno, welcome up to the stage again. Good to see you. What's going on?
So I had a question about an example of the opposite, where meta never changes, which is the original StarCraft, which has been the same without changes for a really, really long time, and yet still finds way to change by evolving and players finding new ways to solve the old problem. So I'm interested to hear you guys talk about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a matchup thing. It's like the Magic Gathering decks. There's always some element of, once this becomes popular, then the counter to that becomes popular, and then the counter to that becomes popular, right? And around we go. So
that's exactly what I was gonna say. Where it's basically, this is just the food chain we described before, where you have the people who theorycraft, and then you have the adopters and the performers, but then you have the underdogs and the people who challenge it. And that this can go on for a very, very long time, even in a balanced game like StarCraft. She said.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm curious, like, you guys' view on this. Do you think every kind of game could basically have this sort of, you know, long tail kind of shifting meta naturally, and you just have to have like conviction and sort of be brave enough to just leave it alone, it will just happen? Or do you think StarCraft and some of these games are just really well designed and lucky, or what?
Yeah, I do think like Classic is another example. Classic WoW is another example. Like the stuff that has come out, despite people playing on private servers forever, which have tried to simulate as much as possible. Classic, Vanilla Classic came out, and it was a slightly different context in a variety of important ways, and suddenly there were all kinds of new things happening. So, same environment for the most part, but tiny little changes. But I think games that have, by their nature, the context shifts as much as the meta is shifting. So there's like the content or the context is changing as well as the meta, versus the context is static and only the meta is changing. Like StarCraft's the example of that one, and then you could say WoW is an example of the other one. Going through tiers or even boss to boss, the meta is changing because the bosses are different. Is an example of the first one, but yeah. So I think the how much it changes is definitely different based on the type of game you're making. But I think metas can be pretty healthy for a long time, even in static environments.
Yeah, static doesn't mean that players aren't engaged. You can keep players engaged in a static environment by either introducing new content or just making a game that is so deep and complex that there's a lot to unpack. And often probably there's some unintended depth and complexity when you try to design very deep and complex systems. So um, it's just about keeping your core community engaged with your game, and even if you left the meta of the game alone but introduced a little bit new, context, like Kevin was saying, that you can keep it fresh, or you can leave it up to the players to keep it fresh for themselves, like in the StarCraft community. But just because there's a lot of depth and complexity to that game. But that's going to be the last thing I say. I have to head out. Speaking of aforementioned social life, thank you guys. I have a hard stop.
Yep.
Peace
We're
out.
gonna wrap it up in a sec. But yeah, I mean, it was
Thanks,
a good
Candace.
topic. We didn't even talk about we didn't even talk about like Smash Brothers. That's a really good example of like
Yeah,
the meta
I was just about to get
changing,
there.
The game never changes, But anyways, we could wrap it up. Luca, you want to take us out?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks everybody for showing up. We'll be back next Wednesday, same time. And as usual, if you've got questions, topic suggestions, or you just want to chew the fat, hit us up in the Discord here. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right, that was the meta discussion. Pretty good stuff. I think we hit a lot of really important topics. But yeah, it's super complex. It's very, very complex. And it's complex from the player angle, not to mention like how devs have to treat it. So yeah, there would be so much more to discuss in detail and specific examples on so many different games, but fortunately we only had an hour. So anyway, I hope you liked it. If you did, please take that like button out for a nice lobster bisque, and then yada yada yada, it ends up getting clicked. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.